Hello, I'm Paul Behrman, and this is Talking About The Who, a new podcast dedicated to that nice rock and roll band from Shepherd's Bush, London. Welcome to episode 7 of season 1, the penultimate episode of this first season of the podcast, featuring the first part of my two-part conversation with Who author and photographer Matt Kent. Don't forget to give us a 5-star rating on whatever podcast app you use to listen to us on, and be sure to head over to patreon.com/talkingaboutthewho if you'd like to gain access to our semi-regular bits of bonus content. Before we hear from Matt Kent, we're going to look at some Who-related news, in particular the live shows for 2025 that have recently been announced. On Thursday 27th and Sunday 30th of March, The Who will be headlining the Royal Albert Hall with support from Level 42 as part of this year's week-long series of concerts for the Teenage Cancer Trust. The band have also announced 2 gigs in Italy on 20th and 22nd of July, and as well as his UK tour in April and May, Roger Daltrey will be headlining at Audley End House in Saffron Walden, Essex on 1st of August, with support from Ocean Colour Scene and Cast. At the time of recording, we don't know what the lineup for this year's Who shows will look like. I noticed that bass player John Button and keyboardist Lauren Gold have both posted on Instagram about the Teenage Cancer Trust gigs, so perhaps unsurprisingly, given their long-term involvement with the band, it looks like they're going to be involved again this year. However, violinist Katie Jacoby, who's been touring with the band since 2019, hasn't posted anything about the upcoming shows, so it seems likely that The Who won't be using the orchestra this year, which ties in with what Pete Townshend said in his interview with The Standard back in October about the band wanting to go back to basics in 2025. I get the feeling that we're going to get the core 7-man lineup who've been in place since 2019, minus the orchestra. That's Pete, Roger, John Button, Lauren Gold, Zach Starkey on drums, Simon Townsend on guitar and Billy Nichols on backing vocals, playing what we can now consider as a standard electric Who set. I said in a previous episode that this would be the lineup I would least like to see this year. That's not because of the people involved, far from it, but because to me it would feel like a bit of a step backwards, and I don't think that's something they should be doing during these final few years as a live band. In our previous episode, Ethan and Betts from the YouTube channel The Fisher Protocol talked about the idea of a more acoustic-based Who lineup, playing more intimate venues, talking to the audience, talking to each other, telling stories, pulling out a few of the deeper cuts, and keeping everything nice and loose. Now, something along those lines is what I'd personally like to see from The Who this year. As Betts said, you don't have to hit us with both barrels anymore. But will it happen? Time will tell, I guess. To be honest, I'm personally more excited about the Roger Daltrey solo tour this year, especially as I'm planning on being there myself. I did have a look at the Teenage Cancer Trust tickets for March, but they were slightly too rich for my blood. If I knew in advance that the Who of 2025 would be similar to what Roger's solo band looks and sounds like, I might go all out to see them again. And who's to say that lineup still won't happen? But I'm very much looking forward to seeing, for the first time, a Roger Daltrey solo gig. I did see him as part of the British Rock Symphony at the Albert Hall in 1999, but I don't think that counts. What about you guys? Are you planning on seeing The Who or Roger Daltrey solo this year? And what sort of Who lineup do you want to see? Let us know via the Talking About The Who social media channels, Facebook, Instagram or Bluesky. Let's now move on to our special guest for this episode and the next, Matt Kent. So who is Matt Kent? Matt Kent was one of the organisers for the Who convention held in Shepherd's Bush in 1995, which featured a headline set from Roger Daltrey and John Entwistle, plus their band which included Zach Starkey, Simon Townsend and Jodie Linscott amongst others. A second convention was arranged at the Astoria in 1998, by which time Matt was producing the Naked Eye fanzine, which ran for several years and featured interviews with Roger, John and Pete throughout its history. He co-wrote the book Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere, The Complete Chronicle of The Who, 1958 to 1978 with Andy Neal, which details what the band did more or less every day throughout those 20 years. In 1998, Matt was asked by Pete Townshend to go and work for him, managing his 2 websites and travelling on the road with the recently reformed Who. After leaving Pete's employ in 2006, Matt decided to take up photography and had the great fortune to photograph many established bands and artists on stage over the next decade. He's also written liner notes for various Who reissues and Pete Townshend solo releases. I spoke to Matt remotely in January, which turned out to be a fascinating, thoroughly enjoyable, mammoth 2.5 hour conversation. That should give you an idea why I've decided to make this a two-parter. We had a lot to talk about, and some of what you're about to hear from Matt has never been spoken about in public before. And so, without any further ado, here's part 1 of my conversation with Matt Kent. Yeah, so let's start with something you've been involved in recently, which is putting together a new issue of the Naked Eye fanzine, which is the first issue for 22 years. Is that right?
That's right. First printed one. I mean, I did go online for a few years, but it's the first printed one since 2002.
Yeah, can you just talk us through what was the reason for doing that? And
it was just really to celebrate the 60th anniversary. I was a bit disappointed that there was no official celebrations. And originally I was going to do a Who at 60 website, basically featuring memorabilia and, specific points that happened in the band's career. But as it sort of progressed, I got the feeling it was going to just be too much work. And I ran it past the band's management, got no interest whatsoever in doing anything to support the band's 60th. So, it's that old saying, and if you want something done, do it yourself. And I always thought that Naked Eye never really finished as it should have. There wasn't another issue ready, but John died. And I never really had I never really felt like carrying it on after John died, because John was a big issue of a big part of Naked Eye. He was always very helpful. He was always very approachable, and he liked what we was doing. So it sort of just faded out rather than anything else, and I felt it needed a better ending than that. So that was it, really. It was really to put an end to Naked Eye, I guess, and also to celebrate the band's 60th. I just wanted to do something to celebrate an important milestone in the band's career. And I'd been on for years about doing an exhibition, with an official exhibition. And every time I suggested something, I got shot down. So it was just a case of doing something that I knew I could do fairly easily, fairly cost effective. And, and also it got me back into doing some writing, which was nice. But it was real fun doing it. And I thought it was like a full stop. That's how it felt when I was doing it. This is the end of an era for me. But sort of conversely, it gave me more of an appetite to do additional stuff. So I don't know if it is the end of it. There may be more editions coming down the line, special editions. It won't be a regular sort of monthly, quarterly or whatever magazine. But I was pleased with how it sold and the reception it got. And I'd like to think it sort of summed up 60 years. It wasn't just the band's 60 years. It was also 50 odd years of me following the band. So, a lot of it is my parallel story with the band's history and how I got involved with the band and what the band means to me.
Yeah, I mean, I managed to get hold of a copy of the new Naked Eye, and the one thing that really stood out to me was the fact that, as you say, not only was it covering the 60-year history, but also your journey with the band and your involvement and telling the personal story. And I think that's what really kind of stood out to me. And I feel kind of similar with doing this podcast. It's not just about the Who, it's about me and my journey and my fandom, if you like. And yeah, that really stood out to me. And it's a great looking thing, the new Naked Eye. Have you still got any copies available, or is it completely sold out?
About half a dozen. It's funny that you said it's a great looking thing. I put something up recently on social media about doing another copy just for photographs and that. And a graphic designer Who fan, got in touch, said, well, as long as you design it better. And it was like, well, I'm not a graphic designer, and I was really happy with the way it looked.
Yeah. I can't please everyone, can you?
Nah, there's always going to be someone that uh, says something negative. I don't think he meant it negatively, but it's sort of, I'm that sort of person that takes anything negative blow it out of all proportion.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. But another thing you were involved in recently as well, I think you were involved anyway, was so Royal Mail released a
Mm.
set of commemorative stamps celebrating the Who's 60th anniversary. Was you involved? Were you involved in that?
Yeah, I mean, it was my idea. I wrote to Royal Mail in March 20, yeah, no, yeah, March 23. Didn't hear anything um, straight away, but I actually got through to the chief executive of Royal Mail eventually, and they came back and said, we'll pass it on to the commercial arm or whatever it is, the people that do the commemorative stamps. And about 2 months later, they got in contact with me and said, we're doing it. Would you write the various bits of pieces for the various releases? I didn't have any say in the actual stamps, but I was involved in it, quite deeply. And yeah, I was really pleased with that. I thought it was some of the images, like not using a Brunswick My Generation album, for example, were a bit disappointing when I saw him. But I think it's a real sort of honour, I guess, to be on Royal Mail stamps. They did it for the Stones, they did it for Queen. I can't remember who else they did, Spice Girls. But I thought it was a really good thing to do. It was something that would get national attention. And it was probably the only thing that got in the newspapers that had anything to do with the band's 60th. Um, I just think it was, I just did we've spoken about this before, and it's just taking a punt on something. I wrote to them in the hope that something would come of it. 9 times out of 10, these things don't come off. But in this case, it did. So, yeah, no, I was really pleased with that. So that was my sort of contribution to the 60th, the stamps and naked eye in the end. One of the things I did suggest, which I thought was a good idea, was a second half of 30 years of maximum R&B. Another 30 years of maximum R&B box set, which I thought would have been really good. And there's lots of material that could go on it. But again, no, nothing came of that. They got the reissue program. It's a difficult one because most of the sort of releases now are down to Universal. Not necessarily down to the Who or their management. Universal decide what they release and what they don't. They own the catalogue, so they I guess they have to work out what returns will be on product and things like that. But I thought a second box set to complement the one Chris Charlesworth put together would have been perfect.
Yeah, that's a great idea because I'm sure there's still stuff in the vault that
Mm.
hasn't seen the light of day, and maybe even stuff that we don't even know about.
Yep. Yep. I mean, I think people probably think there's more in the vault than there actually is. I've been, I suppose, lucky enough to be allowed to see what's in the vault. But there is still plenty of stuff around. Plus, there's still the Detours tape, which is still in existence. The 3 tracks they recorded early in late '63, I suppose. That's still around, but it's just having that sort of will to put the money behind it. But for probably a niche audience as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that'd be amazing to hear some Detours recordings. I
Well,
don't think.
I did actually hear it when I was working for Pete. I mean, Bob Druce, who sort of was the band's promoter around that time, had the recording because it was recorded by Barry Gray, who used to do the sound for Jerry Anderson, for Thunderbirds, etc. He used to do the music for that, and he was a friend of Pete's dad. Or it might be his mum. I think it was his dad. Yeah, it was. And so it was recorded professionally in Barry Gray's studio over in North London, in his home studio. Let's say that. So it's there on a. I mean, you can see the cover of it in Anyway in the Air book. Early on, there's a photo of the cover for the tape. So it does exist. It's in good nick, and it's well recorded. And of course, it's got Doug on drums. So it's very early. The earliest recording there would be the band.
Yeah, no, that'd be fantastic to hear that, and I think that should definitely be the first three tracks of another 30 years of Maximum R&B box set when, if that happens.
Well, it'd probably happen on like the 63rd anniversary or something like that.
Yeah, most likely. You mentioned greatest hits compilations. I guess you've probably got a better idea of this than most people, but there are so many greatest hits albums, and I'm guessing that the Who probably don't even know about at least half of them. Would that be fair to say?
No, if it comes out on Universal, then the Who have to okay it. They don't bring it out without it. There's probably lots of the foreign ones they don't know about, like there was those New Zealand ones in the early 80s and things like that. They probably don't know about that, but in general they do. But, by Meaty Beaty Big and Bouncy, then you've got the best compilation there is.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, it's funny you mentioned the foreign compilations because when I was a kid, I used to get Who albums for my birthday and Christmas, and it didn't matter if it was a cheap import. As long as it had the Who on it, I was quite happy. But I think it's from Holland. I've got an album called The Who Greatest Hits, and it's all Keith Moon era songs. I think it's got some interesting choices. It's got Run 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 on it. It's got Heat Wave. I think it might even have Dogs on it, as well as like the classics that you'd expect. And the front cover is a picture of Live Aid.
I think one of the funniest ones was when I got a copy of Who Did It, the track release that was half sellout, half quick one. And I got Pete, Roger, and John to sign one. And none of them had ever seen or heard of it before. It was really quite amazing that there's like, what is this? Never seen it.
And that was actually put out by Track Records.
Yeah, it was one of Kit and Chris's, probably a little side venture they had going on.
Yeah, more than likely. Wow, that's fascinating. We've got Quadrophenia ballet this year, I think it is. Have you got any plans to go and see that? Does that interest you in any way?
I have actually got tickets to go and see the first night at Sadler's Wells. But that all depends on getting dog sitters. So I've got the tickets, but whether I'll be there or not's another matter. I think it'll work. I saw a couple of Quadrophenia productions while I was working with Pete that were put on, one down in Southampton, another one somewhere, I can't remember where. But I think, again, it's one of these things that's made for the stage. You look at all these sort of We Will Rock You and the Small Faces one, where it's a compilation of the music and stories woven into it. Both Tommy and Quadrophenia have got the stories there. They don't need to have a compilation. And having, been around and watched, I photographed the classic Quadrophenia stuff and the music, it's very, I can see that ballet would be suited to it. It's probably a modern West Side Story, isn't it? There's a love story interwoven with two rival gangs. It's Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, it's interesting way to look at it, actually.
So there's no reason it shouldn't work. It's all down to the choreography. But, to me, it is, as I say, it's West Side Story. So why shouldn't it work?
No, absolutely. Let's hope it does work. One thing that definitely worked was the fan convention you put on in 1995. That was a good segue, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was perfect. Yeah.
Was that the first? Was that the first creative thing you'd done related to the Who?
Yes, it probably was. yeah, I mean, I did the odd school project, with drawings and things like that, but it was the biggest thing, the most successful thing, and the proudest thing that I've ever done. I mean, I've had a lot of proud moments in my life, and I'm not taking away sort of personal, you know, marriages and things like that. But from a creative point of view, it's probably the proudest day of my life. Yeah. Um, there were six of us. It wasn't just me. I would always remember the other six or the other five, because they always played a part in what happened to me afterwards. Um, but yeah, I mean, what started off as a just drunken banter between six of us grew into drunken bravado, um, and grew into, I guess, on the day for four out of the six people, a drunken night. No, it just turned in for all of us better than we could have ever expected. I mean, we used to meet in a pub regularly over Tottenham Court Road, the Rising Sun, drink lots of drink, say stupid things, and record. I was the only person that actually see the Who with Moon perform, but we went into it with the overriding idea that we would get the Who back together and play. As I say, drunken bravado, and we almost did it. We got the next best thing, and that led on to, as I say, that led on to Naked Eye and the band getting back together. I'm not saying they're linked. I'm not saying without the convention they would have got back together, but it was a string of events that all tied in nicely, and leads us to the band being on the road for a further 30 years. At the time we was talking about the convention, the band were dead and buried as far as live and recordings went. And if whether they would have got back together again, I don't know. Pete had the Quadrophenia idea, so you would assume that they would have. But as I said earlier, it was a symbiosis thing where each one fed off the other, and it was a great day. I mean, everyone who went to it remembers it as a good day. I don't know anyone that had bad words about the day. We did what we did. We had, during the day there was stalls selling, lots of rare stuff and memorabilia. And then we had a tribute band, and we had Simon Townsend solo set, and then we had Pete. No, we didn't have Pete. We didn't have Pete Children. We had Roger John, Simon, Zach, Peter Bodino, Jeff Whitehorn, and who else was it? I think that might have been it, actually. Someone will shout at me after this and tell me there was someone else. But, we had a band playing 2 hours of Who hits. They kicked off with You Bet, You Bet. And you just knew that everything was going to be all right. It was that sort of relief stage where you could finally sort of have a drink and say, we've done our bit. And it was wonderful. I mean, it was in a Shepherd's Bush pub, held about 800, and there was many people out on the streets that was just outside, couldn't get in. Scooters on Shepherd's Bush Green. We had Sky TV and ITV News down. It was in, I can remember the Standard a few days before, like the Who get back together. And it was just really an exciting time. It's not often you can sort of stand back and say, I did that. You know what I mean? When it's something like that. And when I say I'm using it as almost like the royal we,
Yeah.
what the six of us did that. and it all came from just being drunk one night. As maybe the best ideas always come from.
Yeah, that's it. How easy or difficult was it to put the whole thing together?
It was really difficult. I mean, we did a lot of publicity with Record Collector magazine. Um, we went, you know, many many miles walking around the West End, putting flyers in places. Um, but the selling tickets wasn't the most difficult part. I mean, it sold out pretty quickly, just through the adverts and the flyers. Um, it was difficult with regards to getting the band to play. Um, we got a Mark Donovan was on "Don't Forget Your Toothbrush." That
Oh, that's a blast from the past.
yeah, with Chris Evans, and he was. They used to do this quiz, the star against the fan or whatever, and Roger was on it, and Mark was on it, and I know Mark mentioned it to him, and Roger basically said, "Yeah, just tell me the day, I'll be there." Didn't quite work out that easy. Um, Roger was due to tour Australia after the convention in October. Um, and the date of the convention was set to tie in with when I first saw him at the Oval, the nearest Saturday to September the 18th. So we knew they was going to be doing a tour. So we approached Trinfold and Roger, and it was basically radio silence for a while, doing everything. And then it was, yeah, Roger's going to do it. And then a week before the actual date, Roger's not doing it. And it was like, this is a problem, and that, when your heart really drops and you just don't see any way out of it. And then,
Had you already advertised that he was going to be there with
no,
John?
we never advertised it. We just said special guests. We just advertised Deja Who, which was the tribute band, and Simon, and special guests. But it wasn't, it wasn't a secret that Roger and John were going to be there amongst the people we knew, fans, and it sort of spread from that. But say a week before, it was, no, he's not going to do it, and the Australia tour was off. But then on the Wednesday before, I had a call from Trinfold to tell me that they were going to do it. Roger and John were going to do it. And I said, I said earlier about Trinfold, but I think Trinfold came to our aid on that occasion. I think they sort of paid bills for the band and everything else, and enabled them to do it. I don't think they wanted to let the fans down. It was a tribute to them. Well, they both really enjoyed it. Roger said to me a few times that without that, he don't think the Who would have carried on afterwards. But they put on such a good show. I mean, it's on the internet, it's on YouTube. We videoed it. It wasn't the best quality, but it is out there. And it was fantastic. It did a lot from Quadrophenia, 10 or so songs from Quadrophenia. So it made sense that Quadrophenia was in their minds for possibly the next, March announcement for the Hyde Park show. And without making me sound big-headed or whatever, it was an amazing achievement, from a band that were really doing nothing. And Roger had been doing solo stuff, he had his own band going. But to get them to come and play the fan convention was pretty special.
Yeah, I could totally see why you say it's one of your proudest moments, and I bet it was fantastic.
It was. Yeah, no, I still wax lyrical over it, and people that I know that went, really, every time we meet up, it gets mentioned. It's 30 years this year as well.
Wow.
I did have some people on Facebook saying, "Oh, you're going to do something else?" I said, "Yeah, should we do it this year?" Joking. But it's like, "Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there."
You never know, someone might be planning it right now. That'd be nice. Yeah, so the convention led more or less directly to Naked Eye,
That's right.
I assume, yeah. And then from there, you ended up working for Pete.
Well,
Um,
it was after the second convention. I mean,
oh, yes, yeah.
we did another convention in '98 at the Astoria, much bigger place, but it paled in comparison. You know, we did at one stage hope that Pete would do an acoustic set, but it was at that stage where the internet was. People were beginning to realise how they could use the internet for bad as well as good. You know, the chat rooms were becoming a little bit toxic um, at times, and I think that put Pete off. So that was in the September '98, and the following month I got a call from Pete asking me to go and work for him. So I think I'd sort of in between, so between '95 and '98, I was quite close to Pete's office. They would give me news and stuff like that. I was invited to the Tommy premiere and the Tommy after parties that went on. And anything that was going on, Pete's office would let me know, as would Trinifold, if Roger was doing anything as well. Um, so I'd sort of known Pete more closely for 3 years at that point. And he rang me up and asked if I wanted to run his websites or, make his websites happen and run them. And I didn't believe it was him, first of all. I was at work. And I thought it was my friend Ross Elfin. And I was like, fuck off, Ross, what do you want? I'm working. And he's like, no, it's Pete Townshend. I was like, yeah, right. And when you sort of, and it's probably something that still makes me shiver at times, but when when the penny drops and it begins to dawn on you that this is Pete Townshend, it was like, oh, well, Pete. And yeah, he just asked me to go and work for him. And, it took me whatever the smallest fraction of a second it is that you can think of to say yes. I knew Pete's reputation, but I also knew it was going to be a chance of a lifetime for me and change direction for me. By that stage, I'd also started writing Anywhere book with Andy Neal. And so it just totally changed my life. I was in the middle of this amazing creative arena. There was so much going on with the book, Pete doing that, still doing Naked Eye, doing the conventions, and it was a new beginning for me. It's gone full circle since, and I'm back doing that same job I was doing when I took the phone call from Pete. So,
yeah, what's the saying? Don't cry because it ended. Smile because it happened. Is that it? Something like that.
Yeah, it's a part of my life where for 10 years I was living in a different world, and it changed me. Not necessarily always for the better. There was friends I had before that sort of got neglected because I was out on the road and things like that. And it's not. I'm not proud to say it. It sort of buggered up relationships and all sorts of things. But the good bits, it allowed me to be creative in areas that I didn't think I could be. It was pretty much learn on the job. I mean, in his book, Pete said that I actually volunteered for the job because I was a computer geek. And that's not how it happened. And I wasn't a computer geek. I didn't know, one end of a computer from the other. I knew how to switch it on. I knew how to use a word processor. That was about it. And a lot of it was learning on the job, which I love. I like to be under pressure, work-wise. But it was a 10 years that is so far removed from my life now and before that sometimes I have to question whether it actually happened. Um, but it was a great 10 years. There was ups and downs, but it was a 10 years of my life that I wouldn't change, and I would do it again tomorrow, given the opportunity.
Hmm. It's quite amazing that he would have chosen someone who didn't know anything about computers to run his website. But I'm
Mm.
guessing he must have just had a good feeling about you as a person, and like you say, you knew people in his office and that kind of thing from the conventional
Yeah,
naked
I
eye.
think it was. I think he trusted me. He knew that through Naked Eye, I only put out what was acceptable in terms of, there was obviously things going on that I couldn't talk about, and I never went for those. Although after the first edition, I did get told off by Trinifold because I reviewed the Isle of Wight DVD before it came out, um, negatively, and I knew then that there was a line. If I wanted it to be official, semi-official, whatever, there were lines that shouldn't be crossed. Um, and I think Pete saw that. He saw that he knew that I also spoke my mind. Um, that didn't always work out well for me. Um, but I think he trusted me, and that was it. And I think when you're in that business, one of the things that you put most stock on is trust. So, and between us, things have gone on between us, but between us, we still retain that trust in each other.
Yeah, well, that's really good to hear. So when you got offered the job by Pete, you said you pretty much accepted it straight away. What was it like when you had to tell people in your current job that you were going to work for Pete Townsend? Did you tell people that's why you were leaving?
Yeah, I told everyone. I mean, if I had a megaphone, I would have told everyone no more were Road where I was working. Um, yeah, oh no, of course I did. Um, it was really weird because I had a leaving do before I went off to work with him, and people from where I worked before came and everything, and everyone was just astounded. They couldn't believe it. It's who would believe it? To be honest. I told them, I told them it with great joy because it's a job I hated then, hate now. Um, so it was with great joy that I was telling people that I was leaving and going off to do something totally different. And for 8 years of my life, I did go off and do that totally different. Um, and no, it's great. Yeah, I told every person I could possibly think of.
I don't blame you at all. What was it like walking into work for Pete that first day? Did you have like your sandwiches in a lunchbox and
Whereas it was weird because the first meeting I had after the phone call was with Nick Godson, who was Pete's managing director. And I'd met him before on a couple of occasions, and Nick and I became great friends. Um, and both of us had a similar sense of humour. And unfortunately, he died 10 or so years ago. And but he was a great friend. But that was the first meeting, and it was in a pub near enough opposite Pete's house. Um, and so I got the call in October, and I started work immediately, even though I didn't actually officially start until February '99. So because I had to give notice, etc., on my job. So I'm trying to remember the first time I actually spoke to Pete. It was probably only a few days afterwards, sort of starting, but it certainly wasn't walk in and Pete was there. Hi, how are you? Glad to have you on board, sort of thing. It was never like that.
sorting a chair out for you at your desk?
Oh yeah, here's your coffee. Yeah, no, it was never like that. Um, it was. How can I put this? It was nerve wracking, but then every day was nerve wracking, because every day was different. Lovely people to work with. They put you at ease straight away. But you just never knew what to expect day to day work wise. There was always some other idea, some do this, do that, or, don't like what you've done there. But we got on well. I think me and Pete, we did have quite a few arguments at times. I remember that. And they weren't pleasant. But I think on the whole, Pete respected what I did, and I obviously respected what he did. And I think we made a good team. And I think through that period, the work that Pete did while I was working there and contributed to, I think really stands out. We did the Encore series, we did Lifehouse Chronicles, we did the Sadler's Wells live shows, lots of things. And the websites themselves, they were quite pioneering, mainly because of Pete. And I remember once he was to get a Internet Pioneer Award given by Yahoo, and it was due to be 2 days after 9/11. And I remember him saying, "You're coming with me. You're coming up on stage with me to get it." And I thought, wow. And then 9/11 happened, and it didn't happen. It didn't take place. It was amazing. I mean, to learn things quickly. Baptism of fire. There was things that people wanted you to do that you had absolutely no experience in. I mean, imagine the first time I photographed them was when I was rehearsing in '99. The Who, this is not Pete, at Asylum Studios over in West London. And Pete wanted me to video it. I had no idea. And I videoed it just with this tiny little camera sort of thing. It was Pete's video camera. But to stand in front of the Who with no one else there, just me in front of them videoing them, it's like, this isn't real. And I guess that's how it felt the whole time, that it wasn't real. This isn't normal for someone like me. But I think I thrived in it. I think I look back on some of the things I did then, written wise, and I think I can't do that anymore. I can't write like that anymore. It was so different for me, and it was obviously because I was feeding off of his genius. I was feeding off of his creativity, and I was allowed to do that until I wasn't. If that makes sense. And yeah, I can't remember the first day, really. I just remember it was a long journey to Twickenham. But I wouldn't change it. I mean, maybe I would have changed how it ended, given a second chance, but there's never going to be a second chance, so I can't change that. But yeah, on the whole, it was a roller coaster. And if you think of the scariest, highest, most dangerous roller coaster you've ever been on, it was probably that for me. In my psyche, it was that. But yeah, I wouldn't change a day of it.
No, I mean, yeah, sounds fascinating. It really does. And it was around that time I started using the internet quite regularly, and I think Pete's website was something I went on a lot, and just remember being amazed at the stuff that he was sharing on there, like full songs from the 2000 tour and things like that. It was just, it was incredible at the time.
The MP3s, I mean, he did that 20 album, which was basically another scoop. It's 20 unreleased songs that he let people have in MP3s off. And, it wasn't being done. Bowie was doing, a lot of pioneering stuff. But we was also put up for an internet award by British Telecom. And Supergrass won it, but I was told after that we would have won it if Pete had attended at the Roundhouse.
Oh, wow.
As Supergrass turned up, they won it. Um, so I think it was quite well respected amongst, the internet community. But it was certainly, I mean, I think Pete went above and beyond what was going on at that time in terms of giving fans access. He was doing diaries, video diaries, and things like that. And yeah, I think it was a great website. It got a bit dated, and we were just about to, I had got it redesigned, ready to go before I left, but that never got taken on for some reason. But I think it was way ahead of its time, and it sort of helped somewhat with the Lifehouse project in terms of this, but basically what Pete was doing was feeding information down to people. He was taking on the conglomerates side of Lifehouse and providing these, experiences. So there was a huge connection at that time with Lifehouse and what we was doing. And it was really exciting to be a part of.
Yeah, I've never really considered that before, but it was probably a bit of a relief for him. Like, finally, after 30 years, he can almost Lifehouse is becoming real kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that moved on and allowed him to do Lifehouse method and stuff like that. Where he actually had real sitters, and with 10,000 people had music made for him. And so it was certainly, so what was that? So 71, 70 to 99. So 29 years on. When you think we're looking at 50 odd years now since Lifehouse, 55 years. But, near enough the halfway point between that, Pete had this website where he could realise some of those dreams. Not all of them. It still wasn't, totally possible, but it was quite funny to think about him being on the other side of Lifehouse, actually feeding this programming to the masses. Yeah, that always sort of makes me smile a bit. But yeah, I was really proud to be part of all that.
Yeah, I could well imagine. I mean, you had a front row seat.
Yeah, literally.
Did you end up seeing most of the Who shows for the whole time you were working for Pete? 'Cause I know you did go on the road with
Most of
them.
them. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I did the 2002, 2004 shows tours in total. So they was round the world trips. I did some of the 2000 shows. I didn't do the entire tour on that. I think that's before Pete really harnessed what could be done from the road with the internet. So we did some, and it was probably more experimental in that we were sort of trying to push what we could do, but internet speed was so slow. We'd stay at hotels, and I remember one in particular was in Denver, at a really posh hotel, but it took me almost all night to try and upload, like a 2-minute video. But we still did it. That was the thing. We were still getting content out there, even though there were still technical problems. So I did, yes, I did some of the 2000 shows, all of 2002, all of 2004, the 2005 shows, what they were. And that was it. I quit a month before the 2006 tour started. And so I didn't actually get to even see the band play on the Endless Wire tour. It was too hard for me to go. And it still feels like that today. But I have seen the band quite a few times since, but I find it very difficult to go and see them and not be a part of it.
Mm.
And that sounds strange considering I quit, but it's very painful at times, and I find it sad not to be part of it. Not even in a photographic way. I did photograph them for a while afterwards, and that seemed to stop after 2016. Don't know why, but it did. And so I find that difficult.
Why did you stop working for Pete?
Uh, I think we both thought it was time for me to go. It, we'd had a big falling out about 6 months before. So towards the end of 2005, November 2005. Um, and I'd sort of, for the next 6 months, I managed to sort of get back onto an even keel. Um, but, some things happened and it wasn't going the way that I saw I wanted it to go. And, Pete's the boss, so it's down to him how it goes. But I thought there was some areas where it's just my job was changing, I guess, in a way that Pete saw it going in a different direction to what I thought I could do better, do best. Um, and, words were said, and it was just, I had to make a decision of whether I wanted to go on tour and be in a position where, words have been said that really hurt me, and chance of that happening again, or I needed to get out. And I think Pete had also come to his view was that he didn't want me around anymore as well. And this is something I've never spoken about before. So this is all hard for me to talk about. And I just felt I had to look after my own sanity. And that I didn't leave for anything. I know when I did resign, people, I was going off to pursue a career as a cameraman or something. I had no job prospects. I was unemployed from, a month after I put in my notice. I was unemployed. I had no job. And that's really what led me to start with photography, because that was the only tangible thing that I felt I could do and be in control of my own life, if that makes sense. Never knew I'd make a career out of it, and I didn't really. I didn't make a career out of it. It never paid the bills. And so I was sort of out in the wilderness, and literally out in the wilderness when it came to the Who, because I got, so many people turned their back on me. One of the ones that didn't is Roger. I give Roger his due. He would ring me up every week from the road when I was on the 2006 tour to see how I was. And I still kept in contact with Pete as well for email. And we over the years we still have our ups and downs, but we still talk to each other via email and stuff. And obviously, I still do work for the band in terms of sleeve notes, etc. And that was it, really. I mean, it was really sad. I walked out on the dream job, and I think what makes it worse is not many people have done that while working for the Who. Most people are lifers, and I thought I would be a lifer, but it just didn't work out. And as I say, I think in the end, both of us knew that the time had come.
Yeah, I guess, sometimes life is too short, and if something isn't working or you're not happy in a situation, sometimes it's just not worth it. You just walk away.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I suffer from depression and mood swings, and I just needed to get out of that situation.
Yeah, so I'm guessing it did have a bit of an effect on your mental health.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, it's probably still to this day.
Mm. I imagine it's just an intense job in some ways, especially as long as you did it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much a 24/7 job. Um, yeah, it was quite intense, but other times it was so rewarding that, that everything else paled into insignificance. I think, as I said earlier, it was like the scariest, biggest roller coaster. Um, and I think the last 6 months I was at Ilpie, it became almost like you was on that roller coaster without any safety support to keep you in the ride.
And there we have it, part 1 of my conversation with Matt Kent. And if a 2-part interview with Matt Kent isn't enough for you, there's also a bonus episode available to our higher tier supporters at patreon.com/talkingaboutthewho, where we discuss the Tommy movie and touch briefly on the recent death of film director David Lynch. You'll also find other bonus episodes featuring various guests who've appeared throughout Season 1, and there'll be more to come between now and the start of Season 2. With a small monthly payment, you too could become a higher tier supporter and help us to make more episodes of this podcast, as well as gaining access to our bonus content. Patreon.com/talkingaboutthewho. You can also support us with a one-off donation at buymeacoffee.com/talkingaboutthewho. And you can help push the podcast to a wider audience by leaving a 5-star rating on whichever app you use to listen to us on. To everyone who supported us in some way so far, a massive thank you. It really is very much appreciated. Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook and Bluesky. And that's it for this episode. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time with part 2 of my conversation with Matt Kent, which will be the final episode of this first season of Talking About the Who. So in the meantime, thank you for listening, look after yourselves, and as Roger Daltrey always says, be lucky. Goodbye.